At exactly 9:17 a.m., the building forgot how to count. Not metaphorically, not poetically. Systematically. Cashin didn't move. The photograph remained suspended between his fingers, edges slightly worn, the image itself quietly resisting time in a way the room no longer could. The man beside him in the photo, older now in memory than in reality, stood with a posture Cashin hadn't seen in years. Confident, unburdened, alive. Cashin's eyes didn't lift from the image. "Where did you get this?" he asked. His voice was even, but something underneath it had changed. The tall boy shifted his weight. "We found it in a sealed archive, not yours, not officially." The sharp-eyed girl added, "It wasn't indexed in any public or private database connected to Vyurk systems." Cashin's grip on the photo tightened slightly. "So you went looking for something you didn't understand," he said, and decided breaking into a secured facility was the solution. "No," the quiet girl said. Cashin's eyes lifted to her. "We went looking because we understood enough," she continued. A pause. Just not everything. Silence stretched. Not empty. Measuring. Cashin set the photograph down with deliberate care, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the desk. "Names," he said. The tall boy blinked. "Names." "You want me to listen," Cashin replied. "Start by telling me who you are." The sharp-eyed girl glanced at the others, then back at him. "Mara," she said. The tall boy raised a hand slightly. "Riven." A beat. Then the quiet one. "Selene." Cashin repeated the name internally. "Selene." It fit. Not in the obvious sense. In the precise one. "You accessed a restricted memory archive," Cashin said, "which means you didn't stumble into this." Riven exhaled. "No, we planned it." "For how long?" Selene answered this time. 6 months. Cashin nodded slightly. "Then this isn't curiosity." "No." "Then what is it?" Selene didn't look away. "Survival." That word didn't belong in this room. Not in this tower. Not in Cashin Vyurk's world. And yet, it stayed. Cashin walked slowly around his desk, stopping near the window again, his back partially turned to them. "Explain," he said. Myra crossed her arms. "We've been tracking anomalies." "Define anomalies." Riven answered this time, voice more grounded now. "Discrepancies in corporate histories, missing data, executives who were erased from records without explanation, projects that never existed but left financial footprints." Cashin listened, without interruption. Because now they were speaking a language he understood. Selene stepped forward again. "And all of them," she said, "connect back to Vyurk." Cashin didn't react outwardly, but internally. He recalibrated. "You think my company is responsible for unexplained disappearances," he said. "Not think," Myra corrected. "We know." Cashin turned slightly. "And you came here to prove it." Selene shook her head. "No." A pause. "We came here because we already proved it." The room felt smaller. Not physically, but in the way truth compresses space. Cashin's gaze narrowed slightly. "You're making a serious claim," he said. Selene reached for the folder on the desk, flipped past the photograph, pointed to a set of documents underneath. "Those records," she said, "are tied to a division that doesn't appear in your official organizational structure." Cashin's eyes followed her finger. The documents were old. Not digitized. Not duplicated. Originals. That division, she continued, was responsible for testing behavioral and operational frameworks in high-level environments. Riven leaned forward slightly. "In plain terms, controlled influence." Mara added, "Manipulation of systems, decisions, and people at scale." Cashin's expression remained unchanged. but something in his posture shifted. Subtle, almost imperceptible. "You're describing theory," he said. "No," Selene replied. She met his eyes. "We're describing legacy." A silence followed. Deeper this time. Because legacy isn't theory. It's what remains when theory is implemented long enough to stop looking like an experiment. Cashin turned fully now, facing them again. "Even if what you're suggesting were true," he said, "you're standing in my office with illegal access credentials and a fabricated narrative." Riven shook his head quickly. "It's not fabricated." Mara stepped forward, more assertive now. "Look at the timestamp on that file." Cashin glanced, then paused. For the first time since they entered the room. Really paused. Because the timestamp didn't align with anything in the current system architecture. Not just slightly off. Completely inconsistent. Selene watched him carefully. "You're noticing it," she said quietly. Cashin didn't respond immediately. Because he was. And that mattered. "Explain the freeze," he said. Riven glanced at Selene. She answered. "We interfered with your internal timing synchronization," she said. "Not enough to disrupt external systems, just enough to isolate this floor's processing cycles." Cashin's eyes sharpened. "You targeted this room specifically." "Yes." "Why?" Selene hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. Then, "Because this is where the node is." Cashin didn't ask what she meant. Not yet. Instead, he said something else. "Do you understand what you've done?" Riven let out a short breath. "Yeah, we broke into a billionaire's office and triggered something we don't fully control." Cashin's gaze didn't leave Selene. "You've exposed yourselves," he said. Mara scoffed lightly. "We weren't exactly invisible before." "No," Cashin agreed. A pause. "But now you're visible to the wrong people." That statement changed the atmosphere again. Because it wasn't a threat. It was information. Selene noticed. "You already know," she said. Cashin didn't deny it. And that, more than anything, confirmed her suspicion. Mara's voice dropped slightly. "So what happens now?" Cashin returned to his desk. Sat down. Not as a gesture of comfort, but control. "Now," he said, "you tell me everything you've found." Riven blinked, just like that. Cashin leaned back slightly. "No," he said. A faint pause. "Not just like that." He tapped the edge of the folder once. "Because whether you realize it or not, you've already stepped into something that extends far beyond this building." Selene's expression tightened slightly. "You're saying this isn't contained?" Cashin's answer was quiet. "No." A beat. And it never was. That landed heavier than anything before it. Because containment implies control. And what they were describing, what they had begun to uncover, wasn't something that had ever been fully controlled. Just managed. Riven glanced at the others. "Okay, I'm going to say it. This is way bigger than we thought." Mara nodded slowly. "Yeah." Selene didn't speak. She was still watching Cashin. Trying to read something. Not fear. Not guilt. Something else. "Why didn't you stop us?" she asked suddenly. Cashin met her gaze. The question wasn't expected. Which made it more important. "You expected resistance," she continued. "Security, intervention, not this." Cashin considered her. Then answered honestly. "Because you weren't the first to try." The room went still. Riven frowned. There were others. Cashin's eyes didn't leave Selene. "Yes." A pause. Most of them never made it this far. The implication wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Because now the question wasn't whether they had stumbled into something significant. It was whether they had already gone too far to walk away from it. Selene exhaled slowly, then asked the question that shifted everything again. Then why are we still standing here? Cashin's response was immediate. Because you didn't come here to steal. A pause. You came here to be seen. Silence. Riven blinked. That's not wrong. Mara muttered. It's also not reassuring. Selene didn't react. But something in her expression changed. Subtle. Recognition. Cashin stood again. Moved back toward the window. Outside, the city continued unchanged. Unaware. Uninvolved. But inside this room, something had begun. And it wasn't finished. Not even close. If someone told you that the truth you've been living inside of is only a small piece of something much larger, would you want them to show you the rest? Cashin already knew his answer. The only question now was whether he was about to let these 3 teenagers show him something he had spent his entire life building or hiding. On the 72nd floor of Vyerk Tower, where every second was logged, tracked, and optimized into profit, the clocks froze. Digital panels blinked once, twice, and held. 9:17:03. 9:17:03. 9:17:03. Across 32 synchronized systems. Time stopped moving forward. But only inside his office. Cashin Vyerk noticed immediately. Of course he did. He always did. He was standing by the window when it happened, one hand resting lightly against the cold glass, the city of Montreal stretching beneath him in a perfect grid of motion and noise. Cars moved. People crossed streets. Life continued. But behind him, nothing advanced. Cashin didn't turn right away. Because anomalies weren't problems. They were patterns that hadn't explained themselves yet. And Cashin had built an empire on forcing patterns to confess. Run it again, he said calmly. Behind him, his assistant hesitated. Sir, the system, not. Run it again. A pause. Then the faint sound of keys tapping. Nothing changed. 9:17:03. Cashin turned slowly. The office looked the same, black marble desk, steel edges, minimalist perfection, but something underneath it had shifted. Like a room that had been sealed too tightly for too long and had finally taken a breath it wasn't supposed to. Security, he asked. Online, she replied. No breach detected. Cashin's gaze flicked to the wall panel near the far corner, the one no one else knew existed. Internal systems. All green. That was impossible. Cashin walked toward the center of the room, each step measured, controlled, but his mind was already moving faster than anything in the building. 32 systems don't freeze at the same second. Not unless someone wants them to. Who's in the building that shouldn't be? He asked. His assistant frowned. No unauthorized entries. And exits? None. A faint smile touched Cashin's lips. Not amusement. Recognition. Because there were only 2 ways into Vyerk Tower without being logged. One of them no longer existed. The other. He turned toward the west wall. Clear my floor. Sir. Now. She didn't argue. She never did. Within seconds, the subtle hum of movement began beyond the office. Footsteps retreating, voices lowering, the entire floor emptying with the efficiency of a system that feared making mistakes. Cashin waited. Listened. And then, a sound. Soft. Almost polite. A knock. Not on the door. Behind the wall. Cashin's eyes darkened slightly. For a moment, he said nothing. Then quietly. Interesting. Another knock. 2 this time. Like whoever was on the other side wasn't impatient. Just certain they would be heard. If you were standing where he was, alone, in a room that no longer obeyed time, with something knocking from a place that wasn't supposed to exist, Would you call for help? Or would you open it? Cashin didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, pressed his palm against the seamless panel. Nothing happened. Of course not. Because this wasn't a door you opened. It was a door that opened when it recognized you. Which meant someone else had triggered it. From the inside. The realization didn't alarm him. It intrigued him. Cashin leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough that it felt like he was speaking directly to whatever waited beyond. You have 10 seconds, he said, before I shut down every system in this building and turn your entry into a permanent mistake. Silence. Then, a voice. Young. Amused. You already tried that. Cashin stilled. Not visibly. But internally, something shifted. Because he had. Exactly 12 seconds ago. A silent override command had been sent through the system, a failsafe designed to isolate and collapse unauthorized access points. It had returned nothing. No confirmation. No failure. Just nothing. Open it, the voice added. Cashin straightened. You're in no position to give instructions. A pause. Then, you're in less of one than you think. The words landed softly. But they stayed. Cashin considered that. Measured it. Weighed the confidence behind it. Then, without another word, he stepped back. The wall clicked. Once. Twice. And slid open. Not fast. Not dramatic. Just enough. 3 figures stepped through. Teenagers. Not in disguise. Not cautious. Like they had walked through that wall 100 times before. The first, a tall boy with restless energy in his posture, looked around the office and let out a low whistle. Okay, this is insane. The second, a girl with sharp eyes and a device still clutched in her hand, didn't look impressed. She scanned the room like she was mapping it, memorizing it, breaking it down piece by piece. The third didn't move right away. She stood just inside the threshold, her gaze fixed on Cashin. Not curious. Not intimidated. Familiar. And that was new. Cashin studied them in silence. 3 teenagers had just bypassed a system no one had breached in over a decade. They weren't panicking. They weren't running. They weren't even pretending to belong. They just stood there, like they had arrived exactly where they meant to be. Well, the tall one said, rubbing the back of his neck, this is either going to be the worst decision we've ever made or the best. Stop talking, the sharp-eyed girl muttered. I'm just saying. Stop. The third girl finally stepped forward. Slow. Deliberate. Every movement controlled. You're Cashin Vyerk, she said. It wasn't a question. Cashin didn't respond. He didn't need to. She nodded once, like she had confirmed something important. Good, she said. The word carried weight. Not relief. Expectation. You froze the clocks, Cashin said. Her lips curved slightly. We paused them. Why? A beat. Then, because we needed you to listen. Silence settled between them. Not empty. Charged. Cashin glanced briefly at the frozen time display on the wall. 9:17:03. Still unmoving. Then back to her. You broke into my office, he said, compromised my systems, and now you're asking for my attention. Yes. A faint shift in the air. Like something unseen had just leaned closer. Bold, Cashin said. The tall boy snorted softly. You have no idea. The sharp-eyed girl elbowed him, not helping. Cashin ignored them. His focus remained on the third one. Because she was the only one who wasn't reacting. Wasn't adjusting. Wasn't afraid. And people like that, were never random. "What do you want?" he asked. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her jacket. The other two tensed. "Don't," the sharp-eyed girl whispered. But she pulled it out anyway. A thin, worn folder. Paper. Not digital. Cashin's gaze sharpened. No one used paper in his world. Not unless they didn't want something traced. She placed it gently on his desk. The sound it made, soft, almost insignificant, felt louder than it should have. "Open it," she said. Cashin didn't move. Because something about this, about them, didn't follow the rules. And Cashin Vyerk did not step into situations where he didn't understand the variables. "Start talking," he said instead. The tall boy sighed. "He's not going to just." "He will," she said quietly. Another beat. Then she looked at Cashin again. And this time, there was something under the surface. Something heavier. Something that didn't belong to someone her age. "You built everything on a lie," she said. The words didn't echo. They settled. Deep. "And today," she added softly, "we prove it." The room didn't react. But something inside it did. Because lies, real ones, don't announce themselves. They wait. They layer. They become foundations, so solid you stop questioning them. Unless someone walks in, freezes time, and puts the truth on your desk. If everything you've built your life on turned out to be engineered, would you want to know? Cashin Vyerk finally moved. Slowly. Deliberately. He reached for the folder. And opened it. Inside. Photographs. Old. Worn. Edges softened by time. He picked up the first one. And for the first time since 9/17/03, something in his expression changed. Not much. Just enough. Enough that if you were watching closely, you'd realize something was wrong. Because the man in the photograph, standing beside a younger version of Cashin Vyerk, was someone who wasn't supposed to exist anymore. And yet, there he was, smiling, alive, like he had never disappeared at all. Cashin didn't look up, didn't ask a question, didn't react the way anyone else would have. But the room, the stillness, the frozen time, it all tightened around one thing. The past wasn't buried. It had been waiting. And now, it was inside the room with them. Cashin didn't answer the question out loud. But something in the way he turned away from the window said enough. He walked back to the desk, not hurried, not hesitant, just deliberate, like someone stepping deeper into a room they hadn't fully decided to enter. "Sit," he said. Riven blinked. "We're allowed to sit." "No," Cashin replied. "You're being instructed." Mara huffed softly but pulled out one of the chairs anyway. Riven followed, still glancing around like the room might suddenly react to them. Selene remained standing for a moment longer, watching Cashin, reading the micro-shifts in his posture, the controlled restraint in his movements. Then she sat. Not because she was told. Because she chose to. Cashin noticed that. Of course he did. He opened the folder again, flipping past the photograph, past the surface-level documents, deeper into the pages Selene had pointed out. "You said this division doesn't exist in my organizational structure," he said. "It doesn't," Selene replied. "Then how did you find it?" Riven leaned forward slightly. "Cross-referencing old financial anomalies, we started noticing consistent, small-scale budget reallocations that didn't align with any known department." Mara added, "At first we thought it was accounting discrepancies. Then we mapped patterns across multiple fiscal years." Selene continued, her voice steady. "The pattern wasn't random. It followed behavioral outcomes." Cashin's eyes didn't lift from the page. "Explain." "It wasn't about money," Selene said. "It was about influence." Cashin turned a page. And Riven answered this time. Certain executives across unrelated industries started making decisions that benefited each other indirectly. Not mergers, not partnerships, just aligned outcomes. Mara leaned back slightly, too aligned to be coincidence. Cashin's expression remained unchanged, but his attention sharpened. Selene watched him closely. We traced those alignments backward, she said, and every path led to a set of internal references that only appear in archived layers of your system. Cashin paused on a line. Not because it surprised him, because it confirmed something he already suspected. You're saying, he said calmly, that someone inside my infrastructure has been influencing external systems without authorization. Yes. For how long? Selene didn't hesitate. Years. A silence followed that was different from the others. Not heavy. Not tense. Measured. Because this wasn't speculation anymore. It was scale. Cashin closed the folder slowly. Set it down. Do you know what this means? He asked. Riven swallowed. It means someone been using Vyerk systems as a backbone for something bigger. Cashin nodded once. Yes. Mara frowned. Bigger how? Cashin's gaze shifted between them. Think beyond a single company, he said. Beyond departments, beyond individuals. Selene's eyes narrowed slightly. A network, she said. Cashin didn't confirm. But he didn't deny it either. Riven sat back, processing. So we're talking about coordinated influence across multiple sectors. Possible, Cashin said. Mara glanced at Selene. That's not small. Selene didn't respond. She was watching Cashin again, trying to understand something that wasn't in the documents. What aren't you telling us? She asked. The question hung in the air. Direct. Unfiltered. Riven looked between them. Okay, that felt personal. Cashin didn't react immediately. Then, he stepped away from the desk, walked toward the center of the room. And what makes you think, he said, that I'm the one holding back information? Selene didn't flinch. Because you're not surprised, she said. Cashin stopped. That again. That's not enough to conclude, Riven started. It is, Selene cut in. She stood. Slowly. I've been watching you since we walked in, she continued. Your reactions aren't consistent with someone hearing this for the first time. Mara's eyes shifted. Selene. No, Selene said. Let her hear it. Cashin's gaze sharpened slightly. Go on, he said. Selene took a step forward. You recognized the timestamp anomaly immediately, she said. You didn't need time to process the concept of system interference. You already knew it was possible. Cashin remained silent. You didn't ask how we found the hidden panel, she continued. You asked how we accessed it. That implies you already understand its structure. Riven glanced at Cashin. Okay, that's kind of accurate. Mara crossed her arms again, watching both of them. Selene didn't stop. And when we mentioned the division, she said, you didn't react like someone discovering something new. A pause. You reacted like someone confirming something they've been avoiding. The room held still. Cashin's expression didn't change, but the air between them did. Because now the conversation had shifted from what they knew asterisk to what he knew asterisk. Cashin walked back to his desk. Sat down. Not defensively. Not reactively. Deliberately. You've done your homework, he said. Selene didn't smile. We had to. Cashin nodded once, then reached for the drawer on the side of his desk. Opened it. Inside were 3 items. He removed one. Placed it on the desk. A slim black device. Riven leaned forward. What is that? Cashin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he set the device upright. pressed a small recess switch. A soft pulse of light appeared along its edge. Then another. Then a faint interface projected into the air between them. Not large, but precise. Mara's eyes widened slightly. That's not standard Vyerk tech. No, Cashin said. Selene stepped closer. What is it used for? Cashin looked at her. This, he said quietly, is how you would have found the division if you had access to the full architecture. Riven blinked. Wait, so this is like a master access interface. Cashin's gaze didn't leave Selene. Yes. Mara looked between them. So why show it to us now? Cashin didn't answer right away. Because the answer mattered. Not just for them. For him. For what came next. You broke into my office, he said finally. Yes, Riven said. You accessed restricted systems. Yes. You froze time on this floor. Mara added, technically we synchronized. Cashin held up a hand. Enough. Silence. He leaned forward slightly. You demonstrated capability, he said. Not just curiosity, not just access. A pause. Capability. Selene understood first. Her expression changed subtly. You're evaluating us, she said. Cashin didn't deny it. I'm deciding, he replied. Riven exhaled. Deciding what? Cashin's eyes moved across all three of them. Whether you walk out of this room, he said, as intruders. A pause. Or as participants. The words landed differently than anything before. Because they implied something deeper than consequences. They implied inclusion. Mara's brow furrowed slightly. Participants in what? Cashin stood again. Moved to the window. Looked out over the city. You said you were tracking anomalies, he said. Yes, Selene replied. Then you've only seen the surface. He turned back to them. What you've uncovered, he continued, is not an isolated system. Riven's voice dropped. Then what is it? Cashin's answer came quietly. A structure. Selene's eyes sharpened. Built for control, she said. Cashin nodded once. And for expansion. Silence returned, but this time it carried anticipation. Because now the stakes had changed. This wasn't just about breaking into a building. It was about understanding something that had been operating beneath everything they thought they knew. Mara looked uneasy now. So, we're in deeper than we thought. Riven let out a short breath. Yeah, way deeper. Selene didn't move. But something in her expression softened slightly. Not fear. Clarity. If you realize the problem you came to solve is only a fragment of something much larger, would you still want to continue? She looked at Cashin. We didn't come this far to stop, she said. Cashin studied her for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Good, he said. Because whatever came next was no longer just their investigation. It was his decision to let them see what had been hidden from everyone else. And once that line was crossed, there was no returning to the version of reality they had walked in with. Cashin reached for the interface again. Then let's begin properly. Cashin's hand hovered over the projected interface. The thin light field responded instantly, reconfiguring into a layered grid of access nodes, each one pulsing faintly, like a living map of something far larger than a single building. Riven instinctively leaned in. That's not just local data. It isn't, Cashin said. Mara stepped closer despite herself. Those nodes are those global. Selene didn't speak at first. She was scanning. Not the display itself, but the structure behind it. There are identifiers embedded in each node, she said quietly. They're not geographic labels, they're relational. Riven frowned. Relational how? Selene pointed. Each cluster corresponds to a decision chain. Cashin's eyes flicked briefly toward her. Correct. Mara tilted her head. Decision chain, like corporate decisions. Not just corporate, Selene replied. Behavioral outcomes across multiple domains. Riven's expression tightened. So this system isn't controlling people directly, it's guiding outcomes. Cashin spoke. Influence doesn't require visibility. The interface shifted. Cashin tapped one of the nodes. It expanded. A stream of timelines unfolded, parallel paths branching out from a single event point. Mara's breath slowed. Is that prediction modeling? Selene shook her head slightly. No, she said. It's observation. Riven looked confused. Observation of what? Cashin answered this time. Decisions already made. The room went quiet again. Because that changed everything. Prediction implies possibility. Observation implies recording. Mara's voice dropped. So this system is watching outcomes after they happen. Cashin nodded. And adjusting itself accordingly. Selene's eyes narrowed. Adaptive feedback loops, she said. Cashin looked at her again, this time with something closer to acknowledgement. Yes. Riven stepped back slightly. Okay, so this isn't just data tracking, it's learning. Cashin turned slightly toward him. Everything learns, he said. Mara folded her arms again, but this time more slowly. Then what's the end goal? Cashin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he expanded another node. This one was different. It pulsed in a rhythm that didn't match the others. Selene noticed. That one's isolated. Cashin nodded. Correct. Riven leaned forward. Why is it separated? Cashin's voice lowered slightly. Because it's not part of the feedback loop. Mara's eyes sharpened. Then what is it? Cashin paused. Then said. The origin. Silence. Not just quiet. Stillness. Selene stepped closer to the projection, studying the isolated node. It's not indexed, she said. No relational mapping. Cashin nodded once. Riven rubbed the back of his neck. So this is the source of the influence system. Cashin's answer came carefully. It's one of them. Mara exhaled. One. Cashin turned to face them fully now. There are multiple origins, he said. Selene looked up at him. That implies redundancy, she said. Cashin's gaze met hers. It implies design. The weight of that word settled into the room. Design meant intention. Intention meant authorship. Riven spoke slowly now. So someone built this to operate across multiple origins like fail-safes. Cashin didn't confirm or deny. Instead, he asked, Tell me, when you traced the anomalies in your investigation. He looked at Selene. Did you ever find a central coordinating point? Selene hesitated. Then nodded. Yes. Mara's eyes shifted to her. We did. Selene continued. A convergence layer, she said, but we couldn't fully isolate it. Riven added, it kept fragmenting when we tried to map it. Cashin nodded once. Because it isn't centralized, he said. Selene's expression changed slightly. It's distributed. Cashin corrected her gently. It's concealed. A pause. Then he added, and you've already been inside part of it. Riven blinked. Wait, what? Cashin tapped the interface again. A set of logs appeared. Time-stamped. Access events. Mara's eyes widened as she recognized something. Those are our intrusion signatures. Selene stepped closer. No, she said after a moment. Those aren't just ours. Cashin nodded. They're similar. Riven looked closer. Similar how? Cashin zoomed into one entry. A secondary identifier appeared alongside theirs. Not identical, but close enough to suggest pattern overlap. Selene's voice dropped. Someone else has been accessing this system. Cashin's answer was quiet. Yes. Mara's tone tightened. Who? Cashin didn't respond immediately. Because this was the point where assumptions began to break, and where new questions formed faster than answers. Not who, Cashin said finally. Selene looked at him. Then what? Cashin met her gaze. The same type of access pattern you used. A pause. But more refined. Riven frowned. Refined how? Cashin's expression remained controlled. They didn't stumble into the system, he said. They were invited. Silence. That shifted the entire frame again. Mara's voice dropped. Invited by whom? Cashin didn't answer. Instead, he looked at each of them in turn. Measuring. Evaluating. Deciding how much more they were ready to see. Because once the next layer was revealed, there would be no returning to uncertainty. Only alignment. Or conflict. Selene held his gaze. And for the first time since they entered the room, Cashin's expression changed. Not dramatically. Not emotionally. But enough to signal something had reached a threshold. You're not the first group, he said quietly. Riven went still. Mara's eyes widened slightly. Selene's voice was almost a whisper. How many? Cashin turned back to the interface. Expanded a hidden layer beneath the nodes. A new map appeared. Not of systems, but of encounters. Clusters of entries. Each one marked with similar intrusion signatures. Each one tied to different points across time. Different groups. Different attempts. Different outcomes. Riven exhaled slowly. So there have been others. Cashin nodded. Many. Mara looked uneasy again. And what happened to them? Cashin didn't answer immediately. Because that question was the beginning of the real answer. And the point where curiosity stopped being harmless. He closed the interface slightly. Then said, that depends on what they chose when they realized what they had found. Selene's eyes didn't leave him. And what are we choosing? Cashin looked at her. For a long moment. Then, he reached for the second item in the drawer. And placed it on the desk. This one was smaller. Simpler. But its presence changed the atmosphere instantly. Because now, the decision was no longer theoretical. It was immediate. And whatever came next would determine not just what they understood, but what they became part of. Cashin didn't touch the device immediately. Instead, he left it sitting on the desk between them. Unactivated. That alone felt intentional. Riven stared at it. What does that do? Cashin's eyes remained on Selene. It answers a question, he said. Mara shifted slightly. That sounds vague. It is, Cashin replied, until you ask the right question. Selene stepped closer to the desk. Her attention wasn't on the device itself. It was on Cashin's phrasing. You're controlling the framing, she said. Cashin's expression remained neutral. I'm offering structure. Riven exhaled quietly. Okay, I'm going to be honest. This feels like one of those moments where we're about to agree to something without fully understanding it. Mara glanced at him. That's usually how people get into trouble. Selene didn't look away from Cashin. Not always, she said. Cashin nodded slightly. Correct. A pause settled again. Not uncomfortable, but loaded. Because the next step wasn't hidden anymore. It was simply unresolved. Cashin finally spoke. You came here because you found inconsistencies, he said. Selene nodded. Yes. You escalated because those inconsistencies formed a pattern. Yes. And now, Cashin continued, you've seen enough to understand that the pattern is not accidental. Riven added, it's structured. Cashin acknowledged that with a slight tilt of his head. Good, he said. Myra crossed her arms again, though her posture had softened. So where does that leave us? Cashin looked at each of them, then said, at a decision point. Seleni's voice was calm, which is why that device is here. Cashin didn't deny it. Riven glanced between them. Okay, can someone explain this in plain terms before we make any irreversible choices? Cashin gestured toward the device. It allows you to interface directly with a restricted layer of the system. Mara's eyebrows lifted slightly. Directly as in, beyond what we accessed earlier. Yes. Seleni's eyes narrowed. No intermediaries. Cashin nodded once. No filters. Riven swallowed. And what happens if we use it? Cashin didn't answer immediately. Because the answer wasn't mechanical. It was experiential. You will see the system as it is, he said. Mara frowned. And that's supposed to help us decide what exactly. Cashin leaned back slightly in his chair. Whether you continue your investigation, he said. Riven let out a short breath. That sounds like a trap. It's not, Cashin replied. Selene tilted her head slightly. It's a threshold. Cashin's eyes shifted to her again. Yes. Silence followed that exchange. Because Selene had articulated something the others hadn't fully grasped yet. This wasn't just access. It was exposure. Riven rubbed his hands together briefly. So if we use it, we either understand more or we realize we've gone too far. Cashin corrected him. You will understand more. A pause. Whether you choose to proceed afterward is what defines the boundary. Myra looked at Selene. This is your call, isn't it? Selene didn't answer immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on the device. Then she asked, what happens if we don't use it? Cashin didn't hesitate. Then you leave. Riven blinked, just like that. Cashin nodded. You walk out of this room. Your access to the systems you've seen will remain limited. Mara's voice tightened slightly. And the anomalies we found. Cashin replied simply. They will continue. Silence. That answer changed the weight of the decision. Because it wasn't just about curiosity anymore. It was about consequence. Selene finally looked up. If we leave, she said, we lose the ability to verify what we've uncovered. Cashin nodded. Yes. Riven frowned. But we also avoid getting deeper into something we don't fully understand. Cashin didn't contradict that. Mara looked between them. So basically, knowledge versus safety. Selene corrected her. Knowledge versus limitation. Cashin's gaze lingered on Selene. Or alignment versus uncertainty, he added. A pause. The room felt smaller now, not physically, but in terms of possibility. Because the decision had narrowed. Not by force, but by clarity. Riven looked at the device again. This is one of those moments where there's no perfect option, isn't it? Cashin answered quietly. There rarely is. Mara exhaled slowly. I don't like that. Selene's expression remained steady. But her eyes reflected something more active now. Evaluation. Not fear. Not hesitation. Assessment. She stepped forward and placed her hand near the device, but didn't touch it. Before we decide, she said, I want to understand something. Cashin waited. What guarantees do we have, Selene continued, that this isn't part of the system itself? Riven's head turned slightly toward her. You mean like a test? Yes, Selene said. Myra frowned. A test for what? Cashin's response came after a brief pause. Compatibility. Silence. Riven blinked. Compatibility with what? Cashin stood slowly. Moved around the desk. Stopped just opposite them. Not the system, he said. A pause. With the structure behind it. Selene's eyes sharpened. Then this isn't just about access, she said. Cashin nodded. It never was. Riven let out a quiet breath. Okay, that sounds a lot bigger than I'm comfortable with. Mara nodded slightly. Agreed. Selene didn't move her hand away from the device. If we engage it, she said, we're not just observing anymore. Cashin met her gaze. No. A pause. You're participating. That word again. This time, it carried more weight than before. Because now it wasn't theoretical. It was immediate. Riven looked at Mara. We should probably all agree on this, right? Mara glanced at Selene. She's been leading this. Selene didn't respond to that. Her focus remained fixed on Cashin. Not as an authority figure. Not as a gatekeeper. But as someone whose intentions still weren't fully revealed. Then she asked one final question. Why us? Cashin didn't answer right away. The room seemed to hold its breath. Because that question reached beyond the device. Beyond the system. Beyond the room itself. Cashin finally spoke. Because you didn't stop when the pattern became unclear, he said. Riven shifted slightly. You kept going, Cashin continued. Mara's expression tightened. And you worked together long enough to cross the threshold of individual assumptions. Selene's gaze didn't waver. Cashin's voice lowered slightly. That combination is rare. A pause. Rare enough to matter. Silence returned, but this time it wasn't about uncertainty. It was about recognition. Selene slowly withdrew her hand from the device. Not as a rejection, but as a pause. A deliberate one. Riven noticed. You're not deciding yet. Selene shook her head slightly. No. Mara looked at her. What are you waiting for? Selene glanced briefly at the others. Then back at the device. Clarity, she said. Cashin watched her carefully. Because that answer wasn't indecision. It was precision. And in moments like this, precision mattered more than speed. The device remained between them. Silent. Waiting. And somewhere beneath the surface of everything they had uncovered, something else was already reacting to their presence. Not visibly. Not immediately. But enough to suggest that this decision was already being observed from beyond the room. Cashin noticed it before anyone else did. Not a sound. Not a movement. A shift. The interface, still idle, flickered once. Subtle, almost dismissible. Then again. Riven blinked. Did you see that? Mara frowned. See what? Selene's eyes narrowed immediately. The system just responded. Cashin didn't look at the projection. He was already looking past it. That wasn't a user-triggered response, he said quietly. Riven stepped closer. Then what triggered it? Cashin's expression tightened, just slightly. Attention. A silence followed that felt different from all the previous ones. Because now the room wasn't just a place where decisions were being made. It was a place where something was noticing those decisions. Mara's voice dropped. Are you saying it knows we're here? Cashin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached toward the device. Paused. Then said, not just that. Selene's posture shifted. It's adapting. Cashin nodded once. Yes. Riven's breathing slowed. Adapting to what? Cashin finally activated the device. The projection changed instantly. But not into a simple interface. It fractured. Layers unfolded, too many to track at once, each one reorganizing in real time, as if responding to their presence. Mara instinctively stepped back. That's not preloaded. Selene's voice was low. It's generating. Cashin's gaze remained fixed. Dynamic reconstruction, he said. Riven swallowed. Based on us. Cashin didn't confirm verbally. But he didn't need to. because the patterns on the display began to align, not randomly, but in clusters that mirrored their positions, their previous actions, even the sequence of their decisions since entering the room. Mara's eyes widened. It's mapping us. Selene took a slow step back. No, she said. It's profiling us. The word landed heavily. Because profiling implied intent. And intent implied purpose. Cashin finally spoke again. You asked why you were chosen. Riven looked at him. Yeah, I think we need that answer now. Cashin's voice remained calm. You weren't chosen randomly. A pause. You were identified. Mara's expression tightened. Identified by what? Cashin glanced at the evolving projection. By the same system you're now interfacing with. Selene's eyes flicked to the device. So this was never just a tool. Cashin nodded. It's a filter. Riven blinked. A filter for what? Cashin met their eyes one by one. For alignment. Silence. The projection shifted again. And this time, a new layer appeared. Not data. Not nodes. But a branching set of outcomes. 3 primary paths. Each one labeled only by symbols, not words. Selene stepped closer. Those weren't there before. Cashin nodded. They weren't supposed to be visible. Mara's voice was quiet now. So what changed? Cashin looked at the 3 of them. You did. Riven exhaled slowly. Okay, that's unsettling. Selene studied the paths. These represent possible outcomes of our decision. Yes, Cashin said. Riven pointed slightly. Why are there 3? Cashin's answer was measured. Because those are the only outcomes currently viable. Mara frowned. Currently. Cashin didn't elaborate. Instead, he said, your next action will determine which one stabilizes. Silence returned, but it was different now. Tighter. More immediate. Because the decision had moved from conceptual to structural. Selene spoke first. If we proceed, she said, we commit to deeper access. Cashin nodded. Yes. Riven looked uneasy. And if we do? Cashin replied simply. Then the system recalibrates without you. Mara looked at Selene again. This is your call, but it affects all of us. Selene didn't respond immediately. Her eyes remained on the branching outcomes. Then she asked, is there a 4th path? Cashin's expression changed slightly. Not visibly to the others, but enough for her to notice. No, he said. Selene held his gaze. That wasn't a complete answer. Cashin paused, then corrected himself. Not one that is currently visible. That distinction mattered. Riven noticed it. Currently visible, meaning it could exist but we can't see it yet. Cashin nodded once. Yes. Mara exhaled slowly. So we're operating with incomplete information. Selene's voice remained steady. We always were. A quiet tension settled over them. Not fear. Not confusion. But awareness. Because now the stakes were no longer just about uncovering a hidden system. They were about choosing how deeply to engage with something that was already adapting to them in real time. Riven looked at Selene. What are you thinking? Selene didn't take her eyes off the projection. I'm thinking, she said. That hesitation is also a signal. Mara glanced at her. A signal of what? Selene answered. Of thresholds. Cashin's gaze remained fixed on her. Exactly. A subtle confirmation. Selene finally stepped forward. Closer to the device. Closer to the projection. Closer to the decision. She placed her hand just above the interface again, but this time she didn't stop. She pressed forward. The moment her hand made contact, the projection reacted instantly. All 3 paths began a shift. Riven stepped back. Okay, something happening. Mara's voice tightened. That wasn't just visual. Cashin's eyes sharpened. No, he said quietly. It was. The room dimmed slightly. Not physically, but perceptually, as if the environment itself was recalibrating around a new variable. Selene didn't pull her hand away. Her expression changed, not in fear, but in recognition. Cashin, she said. He stepped closer. Yes. She looked at him. This isn't just giving us access. Cashin's reply came softly. No. A pause. It's integrating you. Riven froze. Integrating into what? Cashin didn't answer immediately. Because at that exact moment, one of the three paths vanished. Not faded. Not minimized. Eliminated. Leaving only two. Mara's voice dropped. That wasn't supposed to happen. Cashin's expression remained controlled. It just did. Selene's eyes widened slightly, not with fear, but with understanding. Something changed, she said. Cashin nodded. Yes. Riven looked between them. What changed? Cashin looked at the remaining two paths. Then said, You. Silence. The device emitted a low pulse. Not a warning. A confirmation. And somewhere, beyond the room, beyond their immediate awareness, a second system, previously dormant in the mapping Cashin, had shown them. Activated. Not in response to the device. Not in response to the room. But in response to the fact that a threshold had just been crossed. Cashin noticed that too. His eyes shifted slightly. Just enough for Selene to catch it. What is it? She asked. Cashin didn't answer immediately. Because now the situation had evolved beyond the controlled environment he had prepared. And into something less predictable. He finally spoke. Something is now aware of you, he said. Riven swallowed. Wasn't it already? Cashin shook his head slightly. Not in this way. Mara's voice was quiet. What kind of way? Cashin's gaze remained fixed ahead. The kind that responds. Selene looked at him. And we triggered it. Cashin didn't correct her. He simply said, Yes. The projection shifted one more time. And one of the two remaining paths began to pulse faintly. Not randomly. Not visually for effect. But as if marking a selection point. Riven noticed. That one, it's different. Cashin's tone lowered. It's being prepared. Mara's eyes widened slightly. Prepared for what? Cashin looked at all three of them. For continuation. Selene's hand was still on the interface. She didn't move. Because now she understood something crucial. This wasn't just about choosing a path. It was about being chosen by one. And as the remaining path continued to pulse, the room grew still again. Not empty. Not quiet. But waiting. Because whatever came next was no longer under complete human control. And for the first time since they entered Cashin's office, none of them were entirely sure whether stepping forward would lead them deeper into truth, or into something that had been observing them long before they ever arrived. Selene didn't remove her hand. The interface beneath her fingers stabilized, the pulsing path locking into a steady rhythm, like something had accepted the interaction. Riven watched quietly. So that's it, we're in now. Cashin's expression was unreadable, but his attention had shifted entirely to the projection. Not yet, he said. Mara frowned. What do you mean, not yet? Cashin gestured toward the remaining path. That, he said, is a confirmation gate. Selene's voice was calm, meaning this was only the entry layer. Cashin nodded once. Yes. Riven let out a slow breath. So everything we've seen so far was just the threshold. Cashin didn't respond verbally. But his silence was enough. The interface flickered one last time. Then the remaining path expanded slightly, not revealing everything, but enough to suggest depth beyond what they could currently access. Mara looked uneasy again, and if we proceed past this... Cashin finally looked at them. Then you stop being observers. A pause. And become part of the system's active environment. Riven glanced at Selene. That sounds like a point of no return. Cashin didn't deny it. Selene asked the final question, her tone steady but intent. Is that what happened to the others? Cashin's answer was measured. Some of them. Silence settled in. Not heavy. Not tense. Final. Because the decision point had been reached and understood. Riven exhaled. I think we've got enough to process. Mara nodded slightly. Yeah. Selene slowly withdrew her hand from the interface. The projection dimmed, then stabilized back into a neutral idle state. Cashin closed his drawer again. The room returned to its controlled stillness. But something had changed. Not visibly. Not immediately. But in the way, all four of them now stood in the same space, aware that what they had encountered wasn't just an anomaly. It was part of something much larger that had already begun reacting to them. Cashin looked at them one more time. Then said simply, You've seen enough to decide your next step. Riven nodded slowly. We'll need to talk. Mara added, A lot. Selene met Cashin's gaze. We will. Cashin gave a slight nod. Not dismissive. Not final. Acknowledging. The moment held for a brief second longer, then naturally began to dissolve as the weight of the interaction settled into reality. Riven stepped back toward the door. Mara followed. Selene lingered for a moment, then turned to leave. As they reached the exit, Cashin spoke once more. Not loudly. Not urgently. Just enough for them to hear. Be careful what you choose to look for next. Selene paused briefly, but didn't turn around. Then she continued out. The door opened. They stepped into the hallway. And behind them, Cashin's office returned to silence. But the system they had just interacted with did not remain idle. Far beyond that room, unseen processes had already begun to adjust. Because whether they chose to return or not, they had already been identified. And now, their presence had become part of something that would continue moving forward, with or without them. The door closed, and the decision, for the moment, was left unresolved.